Good morning. Great to be with you. My name is Mettler. I'm Vice President Europe at Breakthrough Energy, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. As you saw in the program, we're here to speak about the road ahead. Now, for those of you who are familiar with my work, you'll be aware that I'm not known for beating around the bush, so let me cut right to the chase. The road ahead will likely be quite rocky and far more uncertain. As someone who has spent more than 20 years working in public policy, I have to conclude that the geopolitical winds are shifting in profound ways, and that the global rules-based multilateral order is at a minimum changing and at a maximum eroding. At least here in Europe, we are confronted with what we perhaps naively thought were relics of the past. War, the strengthening of the political fringes, deep deindustrialization. And as I've often said to my teams over the years, less wishful thinking, more strategic thinking. Yes, we are facing turbulent times, but that's not to lose hope or despair. The clean energy transition that we are all collectively working on and the solution it affords, that clean energy transition is a big part of the solutions and the answers to today's challenges. Let me explain. We in Europe, and especially our friends in Ukraine, we know what weaponized energy means. At the height of the energy crisis in summer 2022, the price of natural gas in Europe had risen sixfold. Imagine what that does to your industrial base, to inflation, to purchasing power, to consumer confidence. So the sooner we decarbonize our economies, the sooner we will benefit from the security that homegrown sources of energy will bring. It's certainly more difficult to weaponize wind or the sun. And the sooner we get to choose from a multitude of technologies that can reduce unhealthy dependencies, the better. And if energy resilience and national security are not enough to convince you, how about the fact that the world is in an intense competition for technology excellence? It is certain that competitiveness will now be the overriding focus and theme of a new political cycle that is about to commence in the European Union. And as we also heard yesterday from former Prime Minister Mario Draghi at this very event. Now, clean energy, decarbonized industry, and sustainable agriculture is big business, are the markets of the future, and will bring to the fore the successful entrepreneurs and companies of tomorrow. The game changer in all of this is what is good for climate is also good for security, is also good for competitiveness. And I call it the triple win. It's an opportunity too good to be missed. Now let me conclude that confidence in the future, confidence in our ability to shape things, to drive our destiny, confidence in the power of innovation and technology are critical, and I dare say indispensable components of successful societies and thriving economies. And I believe firmly that the work that we all collectively do gives hope that transformative solutions are in store and at our disposal. Because imagine how much less hope and confidence we would have today if we didn't have solar, wind, or batteries. And now imagine how much more confidence and hope we would have if clean hydrogen, fusion, sustainable fuels, direct air capture, clean electrical heat, long-duration energy storage, and many more technologies were deployed at scale and had no green premium. Ladies and gentlemen, in this new world, we will, of course, continue to work on combating climate change. It's inevitable as the realities of a warming planet unfold. We know that's the most urgent imperative. But we now also have an opportunity to shore up security, bolster energy resilience, and power global competitiveness in an exciting race to the top. If we get this right, the road ahead looks full of promise and breakthrough solutions and opportunities. And speaking about promise and opportunities, that's the perfect segue now to Rich Lesser, Global Chair of the Boston Consulting Group, who will facilitate today's distinguished panel. Rich, you've been a pioneering leader on climate and sustainability, on innovation, on resilience, and so much more. And of course, you've also been a long time and very dear friend to Breakthrough Energy. So thank you for that. Rich will be joined on stage by John Kerry, the 68th U.S. Secretary of State and first Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. John Doerr, Chair of Kleiner Perkins and author of Speed and Scale, an action plan to solve the climate crisis now, as well as a dear friend and former colleague, Kerstin Jorna, Director General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship, and SMEs at the European Commission. Rich, you'll be leading us through what I'm sure will be a fascinating discourse about the road ahead. Thank you so much.
So good morning, everyone. At a time of so much change, so much challenge, so much opportunity, I can't think of a better group to be privileged to be able to speak to than these three individuals about the road ahead. And there's so much to cover. And I think right now, this moment, the choices we make are going to be so fundamental to how fast we can decarbonize, how much we can protect the planet, and how much we can do it in a way that creates opportunity for people, growth, and a bright future. And so, Secretary Kerry, I'll start with you. We had the chance, I had the chance to see what you were doing in COP28, along with many other topics over years. But up close, the amount of effort you invested with the global community to make that COP probably one of the most successful that we've had. And I guess I wanted to start with you to share with you, what do you feel like are the big wins that we had coming out of COP? But there's a lot of unfinished business, and there's some critical next steps. And so just your take on the wins, the unfinished business, the next steps from where we are right now.
Well, thank you, Rich, very, very much. And it's great to be here with all the members of this panel, and I'm honored to be present and part of Breakthrough Technologies Summit here, and I congratulate and thank Bill Gates, obviously, but all those who've been involved with Breakthrough. The title itself underscores exactly what we have to do. I will tell you, I stepped down very recently from being the climate envoy, not because I'm walking away from the issue, but because, partly because of the success of Dubai, and because I see the challenge now as one much more of implementation and of keeping the momentum moving. But I'll tell you, being in public life carries its burdens these days. I was reminded at the airport in Boston the other day, a guy comes up to me, big hulking guy, and he says, "Hey man, you look like that guy Kerry we sent down to Washington. Did anybody tell you that?" And I said, "Yeah, they tell me that all the time." And he says, "Pisses you off, doesn't it?" So I'm happy to be here in one piece. And I live in constant concern about what's lurking out there. So ladies and gentlemen, I think I've been involved in the COP since 1992 when a whole group of us from the U.S. Senate, including the President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, went to Rio, and we began this process. which has been up and down through Kyoto and failures and successes. I can tell you with certainty that what came out of Dubai, to the surprise of many, was the most forward-leaning and the most comprehensive, and I think the most important statement since Paris, but even bigger in some ways than Paris. Why do I say that? Paris left everybody to go out and write their own plan, do what you want to do, and hopefully we would reduce. I think we got much more specific with a much greater sense of urgency in Dubai. And so we left Dubai with 200 nations. The hardest diplomacy in the world, multilateral diplomacy, where one nation can say, I disagree, we're not involved, we disagree, we're leaving. Excuse me. And we left with paragraph 28, which I commend to you, and paragraph 35, which refers to the oceans and what's happening with the oceans, which you've got to take note of, because it's also part of the challenge that we face, and it's also part of the solution. But with respect to COP28, we created paragraph 28, which says, and the words are important, it says we must transition away from fossil fuel in an orderly, just, and equitable manner, ergo third world, global south, et cetera. We have to do this in a way, we have to accelerate in this decade, which represented a great step forward that we achieved with China when we met in sunny lands for 4 days negotiating. And China, for the first time, signed on to agree that all greenhouse gases will be part of the next NDC, which is due next year, January, February. And further, that we must do so according to a plan that will achieve net zero by 2050, according to the science. And the words according to the science means 1.5 degrees. It means what the IPCC said in 2018 when they wrote that critical report that began to transition our focus. So you have to then say, okay, so what do we do now? What is the order, the mission, if you will? And the reason I transitioned is because I believe the private sector is the entity that is going to solve this problem, not a government. No government has enough money to do this. We know from every financial report that we have to put trillions of dollars on the table. And the UN finance report says somewhere between 2.5 trillion and 5 trillion, sometimes I see even higher numbers, every year for the next 30 years. Now, the first time you hear that, you say, whoa, how's that going to happen? Well, we're at about 2 trillion right now. 2 trillion already. And last year, more money was put on the table for renewable and clean energy than for fossil fuels by a level of 2 to 1. So it is happening. The marketplace is changing. And I believe what came out of COP28, when you add it to many of the other commitments that were made, we have the most comprehensive vision of what we have to do that we've ever had. And that begins with some of the initiatives that came out of it. For instance, the methane pledge. President Biden made the methane pledge in Glasgow a couple of years ago. We started with about 20 countries. We're now up to 155 countries that have committed to try to achieve a 30% reduction globally in methane by 2030. And we're moving on it. We actually came to an agreement with China to work together to be able to try to address China's plan. And China agreed to put forward a national plan, which they have put forward, to try to capture fugitive gas and deal with methane, which you all know is 80 to 100 times more destructive than CO2. And even in its later stages, is still 20 times more destructive. So we have a major challenge globally with methane because the permafrost is thawing and methane, fugitive gas, is rising in various parts of the world. We know how to trace it and track it, but we've got to find out how we're going to harness that energy. We had a First Movers Coalition. Many of you may be aware of it. Rich has been part of it, many others, Bill Gates, Microsoft, others. We have 100 of the largest corporations in the world. Apple, Google, FedEx, Salesforce, Boeing, you name it. They have all joined up agreeing to send the marketplace the largest demand signal in history about the conversion that has to take place now. And they are targeting purchases of goods or expenditures in ways that will reduce their emissions, but also, more importantly, set an example to the rest of the marketplace. For instance, Ford, General Motors, Volvo, others have joined together to say 10% of the steel that we buy to make our cars is going to be green steel. FedEx, United Airlines, others have come together and said 5% of the fuel that we use in our operations will be sustainable aviation fuel. And you can run through a list. We have green cement, aluminum, all of the hardest to abate sectors. And those hardest to abate sectors are now really joining in ways that are going to accelerate this transition. I am absolutely convinced beyond any doubt. And I'll just quickly wrap up and say, we're already moving in ways that we never thought we would be. Solar, in 2004, it took us a year to deploy 1 gigawatt of solar. In 2010, it took a month. In 2016, it took a week. In 2023, it takes, last year it was about a year to be able to do it. A day, excuse me, 1 day, and now it's half a day to get an entire gigawatt equal to a nuclear plant of power. So there's so many examples of where the market is moving in ways that I believe is not stoppable. The market has made a decision, and all of you understand the power of the market. Now, can people get in the way? That's something we'll talk about a little bit as we go along. But I believe that Dubai has changed the game, providing we do the things. And I'll end on this note. When I took this job, when President Biden came in and was sworn in, within 2 hours of being sworn in, he rejoined the Paris Agreement. Within a couple hours, I was sworn in. We started our work. We were heading to 3.7 to 4 degrees or over 4 degrees of warming on the planet. That's where we were. We are now at a pathway of 2.5. That's not good enough, obviously, but it's a hell of a lot better than where we were. And it proves that if you take action, you can actually have impact. The IEA tells us that if all the promises of Glasgow are followed, by 2050 we could be at 1.8 degrees. Then we have Sharm el-Sheikh. If all the promises of Sharm el-Sheikh were implemented, we'd be at 1.7 degrees. Now we're waiting to hear from them what are the consequences of Dubai, and I guarantee you it will tell us that if we did all the things we promised to do and implement, we will be below 1.7. Can't tell you where, but we will be below it. That's victory staring us in the face. And the question is, will we now fight back against those impediments that Anne talked about in her introduction as we face a relatively volatile global situation? But I'll tell you what, it's going to be far more volatile for the ice that's melting, for the floods that are going to occur, for the heat that's rising above 50 degrees centigrade, and so forth. You know that history. So I'm excited about the potential of what you all can do, because the key here will be private sector investment, private sector race to the top. And that's what we have to achieve.
Well said. Since you brought it up, can I just give you my favorite stat along the lines of the solar story that you did? If you go back to 2002 and say, what did they predict for solar in 2030? We are going to more likely be more than 80 times more capacity installed in 2030 than we predicted back then, and at a third, 3x the cost, lower cost than the cost declines that were predicted. For wind and battery, it's more like 10x higher than was predicted, and more like 1.5 times lower cost. And I say that because people treat these forecasts as destiny, but when you get great innovators and great people pushing technology and the world coming together, these forecasts are not destiny, and our ability to do better, largely driven by innovation going further, can make an enormous difference. And I think the solar story you illustrated is just one of the most powerful examples of that. Kerstin, I'd like to shift. Europe has been so important to this journey. Like I think the intellectual lighthouse on why we needed to take this on forward thing. It's also presented challenges to to actually have things happen sometimes. And I think one of the things I was so excited about is the Net Zero Act that you passed exactly a month ago. It was adopted, and you were telling me before we came on stage, adoption starts this weekend, right? So can you describe, no one doubts Europe's commitment to decarbonization is, as stronger than anywhere in the world, but how you're trying to work together to make it easier to drive innovation, easier to make things happen, and what you expect out of this bill that's coming along.
Thank you very much. And I take my cue from you, Secretary, implementation. Because, okay. I take my cue from you, Secretary. It's about implementation. And, the mission we're trying to do in Europe is to decarbonize a $16 trillion economy. For two reasons. One, obviously climate, and the other, as Anne already said, is energy security. So two drivers. Obviously, you cannot do this with rules alone. And you cannot, you need targets and it gives predictability, but rules in themselves, they are not an implementation. You cannot do it with public money alone either, because as you also said, there is not enough money. So what you need to get in is private investment, and that you only get in if you look at the business case. So our focus on our economic policy making has shifted very much to the business case of the transformation. And the business case of the transformation is an innovation case. Because in fact, we are asking, forget your assets, the ones that use fossil, and put new ones that use renewable energy or that is a different process. And for investors, there are two questions in this, two risks. The first risk is, will this work? Performance risk. And the second risk is there anyone buying the stuff? Is there a market for it? And we are trying to address these two risks essentially by the Net Zero Industry Act, say a word on this, and by catching up with the US really, I have to say, de-risking policies where, we don't look at the funding needs, we look at what's the risk of your project and how much of that risk is nobody getting ready to take, i.e. where we'll have to step in with new kind of risk-sharing models. Now, on the first part, Net Zero Industry Act, this is the first legislation that we have that really builds on the business case. So for a business case, you need access to land, you need to build your thing somewhere, you need access to finance, obviously, you need access to skills, which is an issue, in particular in these new technologies. We're looking for 800,000 people to actually build batteries in Europe, and that's only the battery value chain. And then it's access to market. Access to land, the permitting issue. As of next week, there will be a single identical permitting procedure for a vast array of clean tech production. Because it's good to have targets to deploy and to be better at deploying, but if you don't have the stuff or you need to buy it from somewhere where you build a new dependency, remember we weaned off of 150 PCM Russian gas. That was a very hard lesson. We're not making that that mistake again. So if you want to deploy, you need the stuff. So Net Zero Industry Act says we need to increase manufacture, and we have the magic 40% produced in Europe. And so the permitting part. And this procedure with a single, 27 states having every single administration at every single level handling this new procedure, which is digital by default, one-stop shop, cut-off date, stop the clock when they can ask you to send more documents, and very clear and sharp deadlines in months, which means you know whether you can go or not. But still, it's not a black box that can take, sometimes we saw years, if not decades. So that's the permitting part. And member states will get ready to deliver it wherever you want to build manufacturing capacity. We also include the possibility to create valleys. So you have a whole region, let's say a port, that is cleared, environmental rules cleared before, and then it's very easy to just install yourself within that valley. And we have sandboxes, because innovation, you know, my question, does it work? You need to test it, the scale-up facility and the sandboxes. So that's on the permitting. Then on the access to finance, we need signaling effect. So we make calls, and they will be launched as of next week, for strategic projects. And strategic projects that goes through a given process of 2 to 3 months, and will get this signal as being strategic, and from there they get a highway, super fast highway to the different funding sources. Yes, Europe is not, it's a bit more complicated than the US. We have different funding sources at regional, central, and member states level, but we are trying with this procedure to have the same signal for all of them and for them to come together for blending. We have our own tools for the de-risking, and here we're really looking at at guarantees, at equities, so to have the right mix for the right relevant stage on the innovation scale or on the rollout scale that you are. Then the skills. The problem is that we have a lot of skilled people, but they don't have the right skills, so we need to reskill. We launched last week in Munich the Solar Academy. It's curricula for certain skills. You take the bouquet that fits with your own skills. You get online training in several languages, and it's portable. You can use it everywhere in Europe. And then there is the big point, and you mentioned that as well. I think there's no way supply policies will do the trick. You also need to look at the demand. And on the demand side, in the Net Zero Industry Act, there is an obligation on public buyers, 14% of our GDP, which is not nothing, to actually use non-price criteria around environment, around social, around cyber, and around resilience and dependency. And that's an obligation. And it's also for auctions and public subsidy schemes. And we are in the process of rolling out, you know, the standard criteria that again would be available and usable in the whole of the EU. And then I want to show you a last example of the approach. This is a premium market. This is green nickel. Now, green nickel, the nickel market at the moment is being destroyed by one source. And nobody invests in nickel anymore. But we need nickel. We need nickel for stainless steel, we need it for batteries, and we need it also for certain defense applications. Europe uses 300,000 tons of nickel every year. So do the US and other countries. Now, if we were able to create a separate market for green nickel, which the dream would be quoted in Chicago as green nickel, not nickel-nickel, we ring-fence that market. We make it a worthwhile market to invest in. And we make it a market that also creates, you know, independence and avoids dependency on only one source. So working around, we're now working Australia, the US, Canada, starting to work around creating this premium market and, again, giving a perspective, an investor perspective. So it's really the business case that's at the heart of how we reinterpret our policy tools.
Kerstin, I have a chance to talk to a lot of business leaders on climate traveling the world, and the issues you're tackling, particularly the permitting challenge, which is driving everyone crazy who's trying to build in this space. The fact that government procurement policies often feel like they were written in the 1990s, not in the 2020s, and they're not reflecting the world that we need to live in, along with like being able to separate the premium markets. It's a really big, I know there's a lot of implementation left. The proof is always in the pudding. It's a huge step forward for the issues that I think really cause business leaders a lot of consternation. So we're really wishing you all the best in that implementation. So these days, when we think about John, we're thinking about this unbelievable contribution that he and his wife made to start the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. And it's an incredible gift, not just to Stanford, but to the world. But I want to come back to at least the most visible contribution you made prior to that one, which is this incredible book you wrote back in 2021 about speed and scale. And you took all of the sort of private capital discipline for which you were, you know, one of the truly best in the world, and then you applied it to the climate crisis and said, what do we actually need to achieve, and how do we know if we're getting there? And I know you recently updated your thinking on that because it's been 2.5, 3 years since you did that. And I'd just love your take on, like, where do you feel like we're tracking well? Where do you feel like we're struggling? Just your read since you wrote the book a couple years ago.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind thoughts. And Kerstin has offered everybody a green nickel. That's great. I want one. I'd like to offer everyone a green plan, which is the speed and scale. It looks like a book, but in fact it's not. It's 10 big objectives developed with my partner, Ryan Pashansaram, and 49 measurable, specific, time-bound key results that allow us to track our progress. So if you'll send your email address to either Ryan or me through the conference app, we'll send you an inscribed plan to get us to net zero by 2050 with 49 specific, aggressive, and graded key results. Now, Rich said that we can track the progress of this. Indeed, the easy part of the plan is where there's broad agreement. That's on the goals that we all know we must pursue. Electrified transportation, decarbonize the grid, fix our food systems, protect nature, clean up industry, and remove carbon. But the twist is that there are 4 accelerators. We can't take forever to do this. We're on a time-bound mission. And so winning the politics and policy, getting the IRA passed as an example, or the Green New Deal in Europe is crucial. Turning our movements into action, innovating. We have only half the technology we need to get to net zero by 2050. We can and must deploy more of the now, solar, wind, EVs, what we know works. But we must also invest and make room for the new to work on the hard problems that are as of yet unsolved. All this then results in 49 specific measurable goals. And I'll wager you can take the work that you are doing individually on climate and map it into one or more of these goals. This is a global plan. It's not a US plan. It's not just a tech plan. It involves politics and policy. And again, I'll say, if you send your email address to me or to Ryan, we'll get this plan sent to you straight away. Where do we stand on this plan today, is Rich's question. Well, the truth is, we've made tremendous progress, actually unbelievable progress. But we need far more urgency and ambition than the course that we're on today. Take EVs. Since 2019, we've gone from 3% to 18% of vehicles on the planet are EVs. That's remarkable. Take renewable energy. Its deployment has increased 50% every year, year on year, since this book was published. Take venture capital investment. When we wrote the book, it was $16 billion a year. Last year, $50 billion, and holding steady, maybe declining just a little bit. There's been a resurgence of interest in new companies. 2,500 new ventures have been launched since the Paris Accord, since the incentives were put in place by entrepreneurs. So we're on track with EVs, with solar, with wind, with refrigeration, with battery prices, with clean electricity prices, and with project finance. All that gives us reason to be encouraged. But we are absolutely code red, not on track, and failing with respect to carbon removal, green cement, green steel, sustainable beef and dairy consumption. And all these are required elements to achieve the goal of net zero. The Secretary pointed out the incredible progress that's been made since the Paris Accords in just the measurement of temperature, from 3.9 degrees centigrade to be the forecast for 2050, when he started on this effort, to 2.7 degrees now. That's remarkable progress, but we must continue it. We must keep investing. We must have our corporate leaders participate in the demand signals that Secretary Kerry has orchestrated with his MCF. I want to tell you that what gives me great hope and inspiration is the attitude of the students. The young people on the Stanford campus, on all of our campuses, know that our generation created this problem, and while they'd like us to fix it, We will not do that on our own. We need to enlist them. They believe that climate science is the new computer science, that that's the way that they want to change the world and invest their careers in this all-important work. At Stanford, we graduated in 2 short years, 839 students, 99 bachelors, 600 master's degrees, joint programs. And this is happening at campuses across the country. We don't need one great climate school. It's like medical schools. We need dozens. We need hundreds of these schools. Academia will not solve this problem on its own. Business will not solve it on its own. Policymakers not on our own. But if we get all of these elements of civil society together, I think we can solve this problem.
Kerstin, I'd like to start this next round with you. You have this incredibly broad mandate in your role where you're looking at the economy across Europe, the connection with businesses on all sorts of fronts. You know, John talked about how we all need to work together on this, but we also need to bridge across climate, economic competitiveness, security concerns. How do you look at the ability to make progress on climate against the backdrop of all of the challenges and the breadth of the mandate that you're covering in this?
It's the business case, and we have to support that. I mean, we have a great business case in Europe because we have scale. We're working on the speed, but we have scale, 440 million consumers, which is a lot of demand. We have an encompassing climate law that does not only look at industry, also at how people live, heating, mobility. It's all part of the plan. I mean, it's the execution that really we have to focus on, and green steel is a good example. Now, for green steel, you need hydrogen. We did not have hydrogen. We did not have hydrogen supply because people said, I'm not going to invest because I don't know who's going to offtake it. And the potential off-takers like the steel industry, chemicals industry said, we're not changing our production process because we will not have enough hydrogen. So one of these new formats that we developed are the industrial alliances, Hydrogen Alliance, where you have the whole value chain from production to transport to use in one alliance. That generated about more than 1,000 projects. And for investors, you know, it was clear actually this hen and egg issue no longer exists because you saw all of them on the aligned. That allowed us to pull together, you know, a meaningful capacity for supply, a meaningful capacity of projects for transport, and that allowed us to de-risk the part, in the capex part, to pull together EU money, but also member states' money and governments' money. Now there's the offtake issue. And yes, there is still a huge price delta between hydrogen produced and the ability to pay on the part, for example, of the steel industry. That's when we invented the Hydrogen Bank, which is no longer only on hydrogen and is not really a bank, but still, that's the title. And the Hydrogen Bank launches calls, and it says, who can provide hydrogen to me in following amounts for the best price? And who is able to buy for the best price on the other side? And then we make the match. And where the delta, which means we will catch the ones with the lowest delta. But there is always a delta, of course. And that's what we finance. This is where we go in with de-risking for a certain amount of time, so to allow both sides to scale. Then, of course, is the question that the green steel is being produced. Who will buy this? There is another premium question. But, you know, the more we scale, the lower the premium will be. And if you look at one wind turbine, one wind tower, 1,000 tons of steel, that produces renewable energy, that produces hydrogen, and you need electrolyzers with a lot of steel, and that hydrogen goes into steel making, and that goes into the wind tower. So, you know, can we have a kind of off-take, supply and off-take circle around this? And this is where we are trying to help and nudge the companies by getting to also standards. You know, if you can't see it's green steel. you don't see that this is green nickel. You know, this is metal, and if you are an expert, you know it's nickel. But so you must see, and that's where standards reporting comes in. Of course, if you have a standard, you also need to say that there is this standard. We're developing green steel standards now to allow a differentiated business case. Because when you as an off-taker, the wind tower, you take green steel, you can say to your clients, I'm using green steel, and they might be ready to give you a premium. At the end, the green steel is being used by car industry, for example, and we have examples of car industry actually going in and buying this green steel, because that's, again, product differentiation that eventually will pay off. And that's why we need to work on the signaling effect, and to signal, you need to do some reporting in some form for people to be able to see this, but we don't need zillions of green steel standards. We need, you know, to agree, because the less we have, the bigger the respective markets will be. And that's, I think, the type of work we will have to do to take this forward, very concretely, business case.
I love that, and I love the focus on what do we need to do to get these nascent technologies to be able to scale quickly, and the speed point, and to bring the standards together. And I guess I want to use that, Secretary, to come to you, because one of the things that you and your team really championed was how to get the corporate community closer to the advanced technology area and to be making commitments. And you referred to it a bit in your opening comment, but the First Mover Coalition, which you and the World Economic Forum launched, which we had the privilege to be a part of since the beginning, has really been this opportunity to bring those two groups together. Maybe you could share, but there are so many innovators and large corporates sitting in this room. Where do you feel the First Mover Coalition is? How do you see its role going forward? I think your take on that would be valuable, exactly building on this point about what are we doing to accelerate these markets from getting created.
Well, acceleration of these markets is the name of the game. I mean, that is the key here. And for all of you different entrepreneurs out there with one kind of startup or another, you may be puzzling and saying, well, are we going down the right track, whatever. Is this the right choice of a technology to be pursuing? The answer is we need all of you. We need all of it. All. We cannot get to net zero 2050 without some nuclear. We can't get there without some hydrogen. We can't get, I mean, it's just, and that's not a matter of politics. I'm not telling you something that's ideological or political. I'm telling you something that is based on science. Every choice we've made in the Biden administration is based on science, mathematics and physics mostly, and some biology and chemistry. And if you go back and review history and see how human beings behaved in the 1500s and 1600s, and as we came into the Enlightenment and Age of Reason, you know, there was a big battle in Lisbon in Portugal, over 40,000 people who were drowned when there was an earthquake. And the debate was, what caused this? Was this a vengeful God seeking vengeance for against people who were not behaving correctly, or was it, in fact, something that we can answer scientifically? Well, guess what? No greater names than Voltaire and Rousseau and others entered this great debate. And we resolved it. That this was science. We understood what had happened. We're back in a flat earth moment, folks, where a whole bunch of people are denying, avoiding, completely unwilling to face scientific reality. And so we have to bring that to the marketplace too now. We have to look for corporate chieftains like Rich Lesser, like John Doerr and others, Bill Gates, who are willing to buck the tide and speak the truth and organize around that truth. Now that's exactly what we need to do here. And I think if you look at this challenge, you have to remember, folks, we're not being driven by quarterly reports or by you know, a sort of business schedule. We are being, or should be driven, by what the science is telling us. Last summer, it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Arctic. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Antarctic. And I went down there as secretary and up there, both, to look firsthand. And the science, you can see it. You see the West Antarctic ice sheet with these massive ripples as it's being disturbed and weakening and threatening to break off. That's meters of sea level rise over the next century. And the problem is there's this little thing called tipping points. None of us can say with absolute precision when it occurs, but it's obvious that you reach a point where the melting of the Arctic or the Antarctic, you can't reverse it. That's what should be driving us in this. That's the schedule. So when I hear a business, a group, we look at nuclear, for instance. Why can't we do more of what we did to actually win a war when we knew we were at war? I'll be specific. World War II, we did not know in 1943 we could win for sure. We had to do certain things to win, like gain control of the skies, gain control of the ocean, know how to penetrate Hitler's defenses. And there's a book by Paul Kennedy, the professor at Yale, called The Engineers of Victory, which shows how people making the kinds of choices you are making every day on the technology actually made decisions that helped us be able to do what we needed to do. That's what we need to do now. We have to organize ourselves more effectively. You need to be pushing for governments to be responsible and to step up. It's inexcusable that we are taking years to get permitting to deploy what we know we need in order to achieve this goal. It's crazy, insane. But that's what's happening. We have 2,000 gigawatts of electric power backed up at FERC in the U.S., the Energy Regulatory Commission. We need to break that logjam. So you all need to not only be pursuing what you're pursuing, but you need to keep the goal very clearly defined in terms of why are we doing this? What do we need to do to actually achieve it? Because if you just enter into a mutual suicide pact where we kind of lay back and let it all unfold, we're cooked, literally. Literally. So I think we've got to remember what's driving us. And I'm not sure that all the time, it's not your average business choice. It's not your average technology mission. This is life or death, literally. And think of a planet where you can't produce the food in Africa. Millions upon millions, tens of millions of people are knocking on the door of Europe. You think the politics changed with Syria and the war and people coming into Europe from Turkey and so forth? Wait to see what happens when tens of millions of people are in 50-degree heat. They can't have water. They don't have a way to live. They don't produce. And they're looking at a world, rich world, where other people are able to be okay, but they're the ones who caused the problem. That's what has to motivate us as we try to organize this and find a different pace, if you will, out of our governments and even our businesses.
Thank you, and I could not agree more. There are two themes running through, and then John, I'm going to actually turn it to you for the last question, because you have thoughts you want to share that I think will be very valuable for this group. But before we get to that, the two things that I heard from both of you, Kerstin coming from what Europe's trying to do, John from the perspective, the unique vantage point you've had is we're trying to solve for two things. One is how hard it is for people to understand the cost of inaction. It's easy to understand the cost versus today. It's harder to understand the cost of today versus the cost of not acting. And yet the consequences of not acting are absolutely enormous on so many fronts. And so many of us in this world are trying to figure out how to bring that cost of inaction to light in order to create more energy and commitment. And the second is to balance this combination of being bold and being pragmatic. And one of the things I love about the legislation you're describing is really an attempt to try to break that compromise. It's not about one or the other. We have to do both. We have to be incredibly bold. We have to do it in pragmatic ways, which, John, brings me to you, because as we were preparing to come on, you said you had very specific advice for entrepreneurs and innovators, and there's probably no one better in the world, given what you've done and given the investment you made in climate and sustainability, to share those perspectives. So I want to give the last word to you to share the advice you would have for many of the people in this room.
Well, thank you. Thank you. There's 6 specific recommendations I have for the entrepreneurs who give me and everyone on this panel great hope. But we don't have time, we don't have resources to be wasteful. We must be clear-eyed and focused. So number one, to the greatest extent possible in your venture, identify the key risk and get it up front and out of the way and removed early. You don't want to have the risk 10 years from now downstream. Number two, diversify your investors and your board and get good at raising money, raising lots of money. If you are a climate entrepreneur, you are going to be fundraising and loving it for the rest of your career. Number three, cut costs aggressively. Cut them faster than you plan. Be ahead of your plan. The costs are the biggest single item you can attempt to control. Number four, get closer to your buyers. Try to get intermediaries out of the way between you and a happy customer who's paying the bills and scaling your enterprise. Number five, beat the incumbents. Don't just accommodate them. You have to be really clear about how your solution is better, cheaper, faster, and a better value for the buyer. And then the sixth and final one is find partners who can help you, yes, speed and scale your solution to the marketplace. You will not do this on your own. All of us will partner deeply with customers, with collaborators, even sometimes with competitors. Partnership is key to winning the rate race to solve this problem at speed and scale.
Thank you.
Partner with policy as well.
Great. Sorry, Kerstin, you added something, but I didn't hear what you said.
I said you can also partner with policy. You know, we mean business.
Yeah, I think government and business working together is essential here. And if I could just put in a word for breakthrough as we close this out with Breakthrough Energy, on your point two about get good at raising money, one of the things that the Breakthrough Energy Catalyst is doing, which is designed to get people on when they're on their scale journey, when the technology is proven, is giving really good advice for how you think down the road about how you can raise money more successfully, what you can do. If you have a chance to join Mario Fernandez's section or look at what they're publishing right now, we've been close to it. It's just terrific work, and I think it can really help you think about particularly the second of your 6 steps in your areas of advice.
I want to build on Kerstin's comment about policy. There's elections going on around the world, and there's a very important debate tonight in the United States. And I think the biggest single contribution you could make as an investor to progress in climate is to re-elect Joe Biden president of the United States. I'm very interested in Secretary Kerry's point of view, but that administration has done more with $3 trillion of commitment, the IRA and other activities, to get U.S. emissions on track for a 40% reduction. What's the contrast between these two candidates, Secretary Kerry?
I did not ask him to spoon feed me, folks. I promise you. It's night and day. I mean, it's Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement. He zero funded everything. And he is already laying out what's called Plan 2025, Project 2025, which is how they're going to put people into each position that is going to be able to undo what's been done to the greatest degree possible. We saw that happen as he underwent the efforts to undo what Obama did just because it was Obama. And the same thing will happen here. But it won't happen because I do believe deeply that President Biden's going to be reelected, that people will come to realize the full measure of what he's done. His record, I'm not going to take long, but he's been the most successful president, passed more legislation of consequence, and has the best legislative record of any president since Lyndon Johnson. And what he has done is a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, charging stations being built, supporting decisions within the EPA and elsewhere, regulatory decisions. Huge amount of money available within the Energy Department. Jennifer Granholm doing an extraordinary job of helping to pump money out into these projects. And I mean, literally, President Donald Trump is committed to blocking most of what you're trying to do. Does that mean he can stop it altogether? The answer is no. That the marketplace, I believe, is now already so committed and so big and growing, and the inevitability of what other countries will do, notwithstanding what happens. But even if he were there with these efforts, the fact is that during his presidency, 75% of the new electricity that came online in the United States, even when he was president, was from renewables. And now it's up around 90%. So it's going to be very difficult. Also, the IRA, which has been extraordinary in the way in which it has excited venture efforts, new battery companies, new storage initiatives, et cetera, and they're bearing fruit, beginning to. The fact is that those efforts will continue because we have a renewable portfolio law in the United States across all the 50 states. So again, when President Trump pulled out, those entities stayed in. And you had a massive effort at the local level, the subnational level, to continue to be involved. So yes, it will be, I mean, given what I just said in my previous comments about urgency and the need to move faster and speed and scale, as John has said, that would be hurt irreparably by the presence of President Trump. On the other hand, thank God for all of you and others who at the subnational level and on your own in the marketplace are going to continue to do what you do. And you know, I think in the end that, I think you'll see it tonight. I think President Biden's going to come out and hold this unique candidate against him, hold him accountable in every respect. And I think you ought to, it's worth staying up till 1 in the morning, guys, to watch.
So you told me you'll be at the 1 a.m. watch party.
I'm having my own watch party. Folks.
Okay.
Of course, you're all invited.
So I
God's paying.
I wanted to conclude this now because I know you have other sessions that you want to get to, but I just want to conclude by saying, Secretary Kerry, your leadership for decades and in the most recent past to help bring the world together to tackle this. Kerstin, the work Europe has done to be a driving force to understand why this is urgent and now to try to get practical ways to allow it to really happen on the ground. And John, the unique role you've played as an investor, now as a sponsor of one of the leading schools in the world to advance this, as someone who's put the plan on a piece of paper for everyone to be able to see. You've just all made these unique contributions to advancing the world. We have so much work to do. As we were just talking, there's so much uncertainty to navigate ahead, but this community of entrepreneurs, of investors, of philanthropists, and of businesses, and of government leaders working together can really help us accelerate that, and that's the journey we all have to be on. So thank you all, and thank you.